Thanks, Macca. What a good opportunity. For once I've got the microphone and I'm between Macca and Smoko. So look out, we're in for it. If this works for me. Who's the technologist here that turned it off?
I am.
Jesus, that's tough when they pull a trick like that on you.
No, hold on. There you go.
Right.
You're right there, and there's the pointer. See that thing?
Oh, good.
Okay.
Righto. Diversity. So we'll get some definitions out of the way. So diversity, when I went to the dictionary, it said variety. And I thought, well, that's probably what I've had in my life. As Macca said, I've been around a little while. There's three blokes in this room that I definitely know that should feel horribly guilty about this herbicide revolution. Macca, myself and Spacco started our careers all about 40 years ago. We probably stood in similar rooms in Emerald, and at that stage farming revolved around cultivation. Herbicides were something that you put a bit of 2,4-D or a little bit of something over the top of a crop into there, and you were farming pretty successfully, and you probably got into a few bits of strife. So along we came and decided that herbicides were a great thing. We banged our heads against the wall for several years, and probably after the first 5 or 10 years we thought, crikey, we are wasting our time. No, there's just no traction. This conservation farming isn't taking off. What a bugger. 40 years later, we're trying to tell you blokes, perhaps you better steady up a bit and have a look at some history, some diversity. In farming, optimism. If that one will work for me. Hold on.
Just go the other way. Yep.
Technology. I didn't tell you I was really good with it. Hey, no, we'll go with that. So, optimism.
You're right with
Yep, pressure again. Righto. So when you go to optimism, I'll go to my good hand. And the dictionary definition, it's a belief that all things will come right, and hopefulness. I'll toss in another definition before I bring up the next part. A weed is something that's growing out of place. Now, it's not necessarily some of those ugly things we've been talking about before. It's a plant out of place. So your crop can also be a weed. But the farmer definition of optimism in the herbicide sphere is we just keep doing the same old thing and we're going to get a different result next time. We've heard a lot of talk here this morning about feathertop rosegrass and glyphosate. Guys, I've been in a few meetings with Monsanto and Bayer in the last few years, sitting across the board table, and it's been rammed down my throat very, very many times. Have a bloody look on the label. It is not registered. It has never been registered. We've just assumed that it would kill it. So feathertop rosegrass and fleabane are not registered for control by glyphosate. The other thing I've learned in life is that weeds, and primarily annual weeds, again, when we started our careers many years ago with cultivation, probably the biggest weeds in the system were perennial weeds. In the herbicide era now, we hardly find a perennial weed. They're not really an issue, but the annual weeds are. But if you don't let the bugger set any seed, as Paul said earlier, he's no longer a problem. Really simple stuff, but it's the stuff that we don't always heed to. That's an old slide from years and years ago, the production barrel. Remember, I reckon everyone would have seen that at some stage, and we've probably all forgotten about it. What's the shortest plank in your production system? It's the thing that on this day is going to make the biggest difference to your cropping regime. I'm suggesting in 2020 that weed control in many cases is the shortest plank in that barrel, And if we continue down the pure zero-till way where all we're going to do is try and spray him out, we're going to come unstuck. Many of you won't remember that thing. The old hernia pack, Paul, the 50-litre glyphosate drum. What a fantastic bit of gear. Again, it's revolutionised our farming system. It's done us some really good things, but it's also done us some really bad things. We're harping on today about several weeds that have got resistance to glyphosate. That's very true because I suspect we've probably overused it along the way. Let's also remember, and I use this analogy, glyphosate's registered for about 63 other species that it still controls. And okay, we're getting a growing list of things that it doesn't control anymore, but it still does control a lot of weeds, a lot of species, and does it very, very well. And in any of our farming systems, we all talk about, if we lose glyphosate, what the heck are we going to do? So it's very, very important to keep it in mind. I think as humans, we go a bit like these fellas. Somebody does something and we just head off in the same direction, and again, we just keep doing the same old thing and we follow the leader. That's going to lead us down the garden path. So what do I do on my farm, or where do I come from? So in about a time, we're at Kintyre Bongeen. We're farming essentially roughly 2,000 hectares of cracking black soil plains country. Because I've been around this system, I guess, for 40 years, probably 20 years ago, I started to feel guilty because I'd been like most farmers. I wanted to be a zero-till farmer and I could see all the benefits for it, so that's what I was doing, and I was flogging the hell out of the system. I was growing what crops I could. Roundup, well, I didn't need any other herbicides. Roundup did everything I needed. Again, from hanging around with bad people, it sort of gets in mind, that 15 generations of most weeds with glyphosate, we could perhaps see some resistance. And of course, 20 years ago, what a load of crap that was. That's just not going to happen. But then I started to notice some things, and I had farming systems on some of my original farms where not only had I been using glyphosate for 15 years, fairly heavily, but I'd been doing 6 and 7 applications per year as well. So you add all that up, I was probably heading for a train wreck. And we noticed the odd weed surviving here and there along the system. And as we do in farm, I said, you'll be right, you'll be right. We didn't do anything about it. So that went along for a while. And then, I don't know whether this might just fall over eventually. So how do we fix it? So in my system, I've gone into a pretty fixed rotational system. Now, this works for me on my farm in my region. This is not a recipe for every region by any stretch of the imagination, but I think the principles are. We've gone into a strict rotation. In that strict rotation, we've got a pillar crop, and you've heard comments about a pillar crop, and the pillar crop is the crop that you're going to make your money out of. And every producer on every farm will have a pillar crop. So on my farm, it's either dryland cotton or it's sorghum. I've got 2 major soil types, one on which I grow cotton and the other I grow sorghum. The 2 most profitable crops for me are those, so everything I do on my farm is geared towards maximising the production of those 2 crops. Along the way, I can't do those crops each year, every year, because that again gets you into issues. So I've got a rotation. So and in my rotation, particularly with cotton, after every cotton crop, we come out to a wheat or a millet or some other crop, but it's the opposite season which allows me to use a whole range of different herbicides, but it gives me knowledge that in any field across my farm, I've got a pretty fair idea what crop I'm going to grow and when. I come unstuck just like everyone else with rainfall, and that sometimes we don't get it in or we miss out. So by having that rotation, it allows me then to use residual herbicides. The big thing on the farm is we try not to let anything set seed, because we know that if we set seed, that creates issues. And I'm trying to take the pressure off my knockdown herbicides by using residuals. You come unstuck if you don't know what that next crop's going to be, because sometimes what you've put down for the crop you intended won't allow you to do the next one. So that rotation has worked pretty well for me and has got the system running. Most of my country also suffers from overland flow events. We'd kill to see another one shortly, but that has massive implications for weeds. None of my blocks are contiguous. So across that 2,000 hectares, it's about 5 different blocks. I've got 4 or 5 neighbours. So whatever I do is really important, but what my neighbour does is also really important. Because as a region, like in any farming region, your weed issue is your district's weed issue, because we share. Classic example, and manage what's around you. Classic issue, that's a roadside. You guys mightn't recognise that, but it's turnip weed. Fairly prolific, fairly easy weed to kill, but it's very prolific. That's the same roadside when it's right. So where now are all those weed seeds? You see things like that. That's actually a slide from the US. That's feather-top rhodes grass in the distance in old mate's fallow. This is in Texas. Old mate said, oh yeah, that's my fallow over there. That's where we're going to plant next year's crop of cotton. And the one in the foreground is Palmer amaranth, which they've successfully managed to turn into something that's basically non-controllable with herbicides. So you can come unstuck pretty rapidly. That's back in Australia. What's going to happen to that old mate's farm when he collects some water? He's going to be really happy he gets a ring tin full of water, and now he's just gone and shared it across his all out across his whole farm. The slide out of the cotton industry's Roundup management strategy. The thing that we do on our farm is we haven't really forgotten anything that's out there. I still own a cultivator. I, like everybody else, hate using it. But sometimes it's the best thing to do. The other thing we have in our district is, and I think in every district they're still there, is there are still some farmers that actually farm conventionally. And you know what? They're producing probably nearly as many crops as often as similar yield to what we are with all the aggravation with zero-till and herbicides. They mightn't get quite as many, but they're still growing crops. They're still successful. And when you have a closer look around their farms, you don't find feather-top rhodes grass. And you don't find fleabane. You don't find all those weeds that we've flogged ourselves with in the zero-till system out there in the conventional system. Somewhere in between there is a point where it can all work. Weed seeds. Again, some of the farms I've taken over the years were filthy. One in particular it's got fences on it for all, which to a cropper, they were pretty. I did my level best to pull them all down, and then the landowner came along and bloody put the darn things back up again. But along those fence lines, they were chock-a-block full of fleabane. You could hardly see the fences. And we were battling with fleabane in our fallow, like in our surrounding farming country. We're doing two or three control options during the fallow and during the crop, trying to control our fleabane. It was really getting on my bat, and we were doing the double knocks, we were doing every brew you could come by. There's got to be a better way. I was probably talking to Chris Preston from Adelaide Uni, and he'll point to me, he said, well, ryegrass got out of control in South Australia around guideposts and along fence lines because nobody does anything about them, and they set seed all the time. Oh no, that's one of those light bulb moments. So I've eliminated fleabane from my farming system. I've controlled my fence lines. I actively spray my roadsides. I've got rid of those weeds. We're now having trouble finding the bloody things in our fallows because we've got rid of that source of seed that, okay, it was outside of our farming field, but it was in our system. And it was we were not making traction. Once I've eliminated that, it's done the job. The same with feather-top rhodes grass. We suffer from some. When we find it, we actively go and do something about it. That takes a bit of dedication, but you've got to do it. Eliminate it. You're going to see and hear some really flash bits of technology in the next day to day and a half. I suggest on most farms there's two bits of technology that we've had for a hell of a long time, and they're the two most effective bits that we need. One is still your footsteps in the paddock. You've heard this bloke talk about it. I think he taught me that. Probably some of my lecturers many years ago also taught me that. Get out into your paddocks and have a look to see what's there so you know what's happening. And the chippo, it's all about first response. You do not go from a system where you're in control to where you're totally out of control overnight. You have an escape. Like I said earlier, on our farm we just don't tolerate them anymore because they were setting seed, and then what do we do with them after that? Being an old scientist, of course, after the system had half failed, I thought, well, perhaps I should do some testing. So I do now have confirmed glyphosate-resistant sow thistle on my farm, and I do have some Group A-resistant black oats confirmed. Only, of course, after I'd sprayed a crop with an in-crop herbicide and they hadn't worked. Well, what the hell's going on here? And I thought, well, I don't know, it should work because we've never had wheat in this paddock before and there's never been a black oat spray in this paddock. But then after about 5 years after the event, we've sort of timed it back, and I was talking to someone randomly and he said, oh no, well that seed come from such and such a farm in northern New South Wales, which had had a 30-year history of Group A use, and their black oats are resistant to Group A's. And probably explains why the ones in my paddock are also resistant. It was not my issue, but I acquired it. I think we should be very careful, particularly in our eastern states after this year. We've had a heck of a lot of wheat and grains and hay all come from other states where they have herbicide resistances that we don't have. You've heard plenty of people talk about here, what's the great way to get rid of resistant weeds out of your paddock? Bale the buggers up and put them in a hay bale. Well, what do you do then in a really tough time when there's a huge demand for hay? You can sell all that crap. Now the bloke up the road, he's really happy to get hold of it because it's hay. But it's what may be in it. So you can acquire a lot of issues without your own doing. So certainly be aware of those sorts of things. Like I said earlier, You don't go from the left to the right overnight. So your first response, when you start to have issues, start doing something different. On my farm, when we started to get issues, I changed my rotation. Went to a fixed system. I've got residuals in the system. They're taking the pressure off the knockdown herbicides. If I'm out there spraying for sow thistle, I know that my glyphosate is not going to control my sow thistle, so there's something else in the tank that is going to control the sow thistle. If I've got fleabane out there, I know that glyphosate's not going to control the fleabane, so I don't try and make it do it. I make sure there's something in there, so it's diversity. If you get out of control, I've got a mate up here where you've got a full paddock full of grass that you can't see the ground. Well, it's probably time to reset this. Don't try and keep batting your head against a brick wall, because you're going to come unstuck. 20 years ago, we could get away with it. I don't think we can now, because like the previous speakers have mentioned, we're getting more resistance. All those things were on the knife edge. And if it doesn't work, what the heck do I do now? And what's the consequence? And irrespective of what those consequences are, don't let them set seed. If that means you've got to go and put a match in the paddock, you've got to go and put a slasher across it, you've got to plough it, you've got to do something. Do not, if you haven't got control of them, don't let them set seed. Because the next round, you think it was bad last year. Then what the heck's it going to be like next year when they're all the progeny of those ones that you couldn't control? My blokes get sick of me flogging them to, you drive past a weed, you see it, it's not hard work. Pull up and knock it over. There's other times when there might be too many to pull up and knock over, and we'll enlist Jeremy's weed technology, or we may use some drone spotting, or I send an agronomist out to tell me what's out there. But make your action equal to what the issue is. If you've got 10 weeds in a field, I don't know that you need a weed sprayer to go and get them. If 10 minutes on a motorbike does the same trick, then just make your action equal to what the need is. And it does work. We've drove down our seed bank, like I said. We're being religious. It's taking some hard work, but it is driving the pressure down in the fields so that we're not getting the mass germinations. We have to be on the ball every time we get a flood. We're sharing our neighbours' issues. It resets the system. I now know, after having a couple of them in the last 10 or 15 years, that when we get an overland flow event, have a look upstream, see what's up there and say, well, I've now got all that, so I may have to change, I might have had my farm clean, but I now know that I'm not going to be clean. So and start your actions. Be proactive, do different things. Just putting a different post-emergent herbicide on after the previous post-emergent herbicide is probably not diversity, guys. It's just hammering the same thing. I mentioned Palmer amaranth. Anyone who's in the cotton industry will have heard of that weed in the US. The US farmer flogged it to death with glyphosate. He's now trying to flog it to death with dicamba. Guess what? It's 100% resistant to glyphosate, and it's probably about 40% tolerant to dicamba after 4 seasons of use. All they've done was they've changed what they were doing to it, but they haven't changed their tactic. They're still doing exactly the same thing, it's just a different hammer. So diversity is not just using a different hammer. Diversity is going about it a different way. I'll leave it at that, Paul, you're looking hungry.